They said the machine would save us time. No one asked what it would do with the hours it stole. The city rose from coal and copper, a cathedral to efficiency. Smokestacks wrote scripture into the sky. Inside the heart of it all stood the directorate, a board of men whose faces gleamed like polished steel. They weren't born that way. The change happened slowly. First the hands, then the jawlines, then the eyes that learned to blink without feeling. They called it adapting to progress. Everyone else called it promotion. Elias Ward was not a director. He was the designer, the one who drew the first gear that could turn the whole grid with a single push. He believed in humane automation, machines doing the dull work so people could do the meaningful kind. When he spoke, he used verbs like liberate and restore. When the directorate spoke, they used nouns, throughput, quotas, compliance. The Auric engine launched on a morning of brass light. Banners waved. Coins rang. The board promised shorter hours and longer lives. The newspapers printed sketches of smiling families under smokeless skies. Production tripled in a season. Wages climbed for a while. The city glittered. And then the clock hands began to tighten. Targets rose faster than the sun. Corners sharpened on the factory floor. Overtime returned dressed as patriotism. Temporary, said the directorate, until the debt is serviced. But debt is a patient God. Elias started seeing men go home with oil on their lungs and silence in their throats. He wrote a memo, "We're producing more parts than purpose." The reply came stamped in red. Purpose is compliance. The first blackout came on a holiday. The city dimmed mid-parade, brass bands freezing mid-note as the Auric engine coughed and steadied. A director appeared on the wired broadcast, his cheek plates reflecting calm. "An upgrade," he said. "Progress, by definition, flickers." People applauded their screens. Who argues with a face that never tires?
But the ledger told another story. To reach the promised output, the directorate had sold futures on energy that didn't yet exist, then borrowed against the applause. The machine wasn't powering the city was powering the machine. When the numbers trembled, the board tightened quotas. When quotas cracked, they tightened truth. Elias asked for a hearing. He brought drawings of a smaller grid, modular, resilient, owned by neighborhoods instead of the directorate. Progress should scale to people, he said, not the other way around. The boardroom smelled of varnish and steam. A director toggled a lever, and the lights brightened just enough to make everyone squint. "You confuse evolution with sentiment," he answered. "Big systems require big sacrifices." The second blackout didn't flicker. It fell. Conveyors froze with half-born goods. Trains stalled between stations. Somewhere in the metal dark, the Auric engine made a sound no one had designed for. A slow, grinding sigh. People walked home by memory. For the first time, the city could hear itself breathe.
That night, Elias returned to the plant. He found guards asleep at their posts, lulled by the machine's tired heartbeat. He walked the catwalks above the silent gears until he reached the control rostrum, a brass altar at the center of power. On its panel, beneath layers of polish and ceremony, he found the hidden switch he'd sketched years ago, local mode. He had drawn it as a safeguard, a way to let districts run on their own if the core failed. The directorate had engraved over it with the word unity. Elias scraped the plate with a screwdriver until the letters reappeared. He flipped the switch. In the neighborhoods, small substations woke like lanterns. Hospitals blinked on. Kitchens hummed. The main grid stayed dark, but islands of light bloomed along the river, bright as stubborn ideas. People gathered in doorways, faces lit by power that belonged to them, not to the directorate. For a few hours, the city learned a different definition of progress. By dawn, the guards had orders, and the orders had teeth. The board blamed sabotage by elements hostile to prosperity. Elias was taken to the hearing he once requested, only now the verdict had already been written. A director leaned forward, metal eyes reflecting the designer. He said, "You turned people against the system." Elias shook his head. "No, I turned the system toward people." They didn't send him to prison. That would have made him a headline. They put him on the Commission for Community Compliance, a desk in a quiet corridor where ideas go to sleep. He walked there every day and wrote letters he knew would be filed under miscellaneous optimism. On weekends, he visited the neighborhoods that still ran their small grids at dusk, legally now, as a pilot program the directorate claimed to have invented. He never corrected them. Progress doesn't care who signs the plaque. Years later, the Yorick engine still turns. The board still broadcasts. The city still hums. But at evening, when the smoke thins and the lamps warm, you can see the islands of light Elias made possible. Little proofs that progress can be both grand and gentle. Children study in those rooms. Grandmothers boil tea in those kitchens. And somewhere beyond the main line's glow, a man in a frayed coat walks home past windows bright enough to see his human face in. We built a marvelous machine. Then we learned to use it with our eyes open.